Your moon sign compatibility matters in relationships way more than your sun sign compatibility. Here's why. When we're talking about suns, we are talking about the inherent power and purpose of your life. Sometimes your sun is in a place where it definitely has to do with relationships. But more often, your sun sign has nothing to do with relationships. And it's pulling your power and your purpose and this kind of gravitational center someplace completely unrelated. And the sun wants to be itself. Yes, it wants to be seen, but the sun is not going to form attachments unless it's in a house that is super relational, where it can only be seen inside of those attachments. So if we're talking about a friendship or a romantic relationship or a parent-child relationship, the sun is not necessarily the most important planet. The moon is. Now, the moon is inherently attached. And when I'm working with individuals and when I'm working with couples, I talk about the moon as being the attachment style. From psychology and couples counseling, we have a few different attachment styles. We have insecure attachment, of which there are 3 subsets, and then we have secure attachment. And secure attachment basically has to do with a nervous system that's going to be pretty chill, can trust people, can relate in a healthy way to other people. And then we have insecure attachment, and that looks like 3 things. We have avoidant attachment. These are people who aren't going to text you back and don't care if you text back. These are people that it's going to be really hard to get them to talk about the relationship or attach, work on a certain problem within the relationship. These are the people that are not going to feel a tremendous amount of anxiety or need for connection. Now, importantly, it's not that they don't have it. It's just that they won't express it, and they might not even know it themselves. On the other end of the spectrum, there's anxious attachment. And these people are the opposite end. They really need you to text back. If you don't, they're going to send you 5 texts in a row, and some of them might be a wall of text. They are going to need to have quite frequent check-ins. They need to understand what you're feeling. If there's some kind of rupture in the relationship, that's going to feel like a really big deal to them, and they're going to need a lot of soothing to re-regulate their nervous system after that, and it's going to take a long time. Now, in the middle of that, and most chaotically, there is disorganized attachment, which can oscillate wildly between the two and is created when somebody has really inconsistent caregivers. Now, one way to look at attachment style, if we use the lens of astrology, is through the moon. And here's why. The moon connects astrologically the planets that are outside of Earth's orbit to the terrestrial. It is our inner narrator that kind of tells us the story of who we are based on our experiences. It is literally how we digest food, ruling the stomach. And so our moon sign helps us integrate our experiences. A lot of astrology talks about the moon as the emotions. This I find to be a bit of a misnomer. The moon is not your emotions. Your moon sign shows you how you hold and how you tend to your emotions and the emotions of other people, which brings you to the attachment style. The moon is our memory. It's our connection to our caregivers and our mothers. And so when we go to the moon sign, we often find what our initial experience was as being cared for in the world. How seriously did our caregivers take our needs, and how sensitive were they to our needs? Because that is going to set our internal state, and then that's going to attune us to what we need in the future and what we look for. And so compatibility between the experiences of the moon is so key to a long-term relationship because it creates familiarity and it's going to contribute to whether we feel seen and heard in our needs. It's going to show whether we have compatible responses to emotional issues. So what do I mean when I say moon sign compatibility? How do we look at it and how do we understand it? Now, the first piece, and I think the easiest and the most shorthand way to look at moon sign compatibility is simply to look at the element of moons. Because the element of the moon sign will show this very baseline way of responding to emotions and what the kind of gut reaction and immediate response is to feelings coming internally or externally. So, fire signs are going to have a lot of response that comes up very quickly. Often they're going to want to do something about it. They are going to want to connect it to what it needs. Air signs are going to want to talk about things and they're going to want to think about them for the long time. They might not necessarily even need to process the emotion of it. They don't need to blow off the steam like the fire signs. They don't need to dip into it. They are going to think about it theoretically and want to share ideas and tell stories and process it up here. Now, the earth signs are all going to want to do something about it. Take it from the Virgo moon. It is work for me to notice what I'm feeling if I don't know what to do about it immediately. So, right, earth signs are always going to be looking at the practical implications of those emotions. What does this mean? What do I do about it? How do I tend to it? How do I fix it? So fix being a very Virgo word, but, right, they are going to look at its impact. The water signs are going to process things in maybe a less verbal, less practical way. The water signs really have a gift of being able to stay with and be in an emotion without it being mediated by so much thought or so many practical considerations, or without it being fuel that burns up fairly quickly or sends them off on an adventure, which is part of what we see with fire signs. So that is a really key way. In fact, you know, when I see a couple that has two earth signs, it's like, okay, I hope you guys like each other, because earth moons can weather a lot together. And I think that's mostly true of partners and all sorts of relationships wherein the two people participating or the three people participating have moons in the same element, because when they reach a crisis or when the relationship feels under threat, their kind of gut reaction is in a similar way to respond to it. Now, this is really interesting, too, when we look at composite charts, because when we have planets that are in the same element, if they're in the same element, but it has to be different signs, this doesn't work if they're both in Gemini, say. But if we have one moon in Gemini and one moon in Libra, so two air moons, in the composite chart, the moon will be in Leo. And if we have one moon in Pisces and another moon in Cancer, in the composite chart, they will have an exalted moon in Taurus. And this is a hidden gift inside of this, which is that, right? Earth moons will become water moons. When you can trust that the other person is also taking into account the practical implications, then you can risk feeling together. When we are talking about air moons that become fire moons, we are talking about two people that can keep up with each other intellectually enough that they can go into the flame together. When you're talking about fire moons, which become air moons, right? The passion and the speed exists at an equal rate so that they can actually step into a sense of objectivity and think about things, right? Or at least that is the opportunity afforded by the relationship. So this is really significant. Now, when we're talking about suns, we are talking about individual lives, but these moon signs, they are really concerned with how we feel emotionally cared for and seen in our relationships. And there are some moon signs that just unequivocally are better at this than others, but they all come with their own needs. So two moon signs, right? The moon in Taurus and the moon in Cancer is an exalted moon and a moon in rulership. Someone once said to me, you don't know what love is until a Cancer moon loves you. And when you are in their inner circle and when you are under their protection and their care, that is absolutely true. Cancer moons can tend to you with an intuitive wisdom unlike anything else. And Taurus moons can feed you and take care of you in a practical sense, promoting the feeling of safety and security. Moons that I find struggle a lot in terms of connection, just all other things being equal. Aquarius moons almost always have a significant trauma history. I don't know exactly why this is, but I have almost never seen it to not be true. Because the effect of the Aquarius moon is a kind of dissociation from the emotional life that makes it very hard to attain emotional intimacy. So you can feel the way in which these could become problematic really fast. If there's a moon that needs a lot of closeness, an Aquarius moon is going to be difficult for them to feel a solid bond with. And Aquarius moons are going to feel easily stifled by the demands of other people that run counter to their need for freedom. Another moon that is tricky in relationships is Scorpio moons. And Scorpio moons are tricky because their desire for intimacy is so much deeper. Often Scorpio moons have a very complicated relationship with their primary caregivers. Even if it wasn't physically abusive, it is almost always emotionally abusive. There's weird stuff where they're, maybe their parents had a really distant relationship, so their mother is bonded with them more than the other parents. And so they are on the or have a desire to be kind of so close that there's a psychological invasion. Scorpio moons are so perceptive and so to the point that they can also, in asking a question that feels simple or in making a comment towards somebody else, cut to the core way faster in a way that feels non-consensual to the other partners. So those can be tricky ones to get around. Now, we're also going to run into issues with, right, people feeling like air sign moons can't be emotionally vulnerable enough, and maybe earth signs as well, right? And maybe the water signs feel that about all the other moon signs. I don't know. You let me know. But so there's a style of approaching things that way. And now I don't think that your moons have to have a positive harmonic relationship to each other in order for things to be compatible, but they do need contact somewhere for a long-term emotionally fulfilling relationship because they need to feel seen and understood in some way. Now, just as most of us did not have overwhelmingly healthy emotional relationships in our family of origin, we are playing that out in our moon signs. And so it's not necessarily that we will be most attracted to people who are the healthiest attachment for us. More often than not, we are going to be looking for what is familiar. And that is part of what the moon rules. And so what we are looking for is the sweet spot between something that feels familiar, someone that feels like home, and yet, hopefully, someone that is helping us recognize and attend to our needs and our wounds more than how they were at home. Because regardless of whether we do it consciously or not, we are resolving the core wounds of our childhoods within our primary attachments in adulthood. And so for that moon compatibility within his synastry charts is way more significant for the long-term success and sustainability of relationships. If you want help with your relationship, if you want me to look at it or to work with you in a coaching capacity, you can book relationship reading on my website at starheartastrology.com. And if you're in the state of Washington and would like couples counseling, you can reach me on my therapy website at autopoeticpsychotherapy.com.